Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Miscoe. I'm a healthcare attorney and forensic coding and auditing expert. And today, our program is going to focus on the Medicare TPE Audit program. This is a relatively recent addition to the Medicare program integrity suite of actions that they use to verify that Medicare program payments are appropriate. And this one in particular is somewhat unique because it focuses on a relatively small sample of claims, usually 20 to 40 claims, and it occurs in multiple rounds with education in between. And basically, the way it works is if you're selected, and we'll talk about how you become selected, you'll be asked to produce anywhere from 20 to 40 claims. Usually it's 40. And they will perform an audit of those claims. They'll publish the results. Those results will lead to a demand for payment, which is appealable, of course. But in the midst of all this, they give you a certain period to do corrective action following a one-on-one education session. And then they take you through another round of auditing, and ultimately they can go up to 3 rounds. Now, the reason that this program should be particularly paid attention to, at least by doctors of chiropractic, is the reasons that Medicare contractors select providers for the program. And fundamentally, they look for areas where there are common errors or high rates of error by a provider type. And if you pay attention to the statistics published by the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services, chiropractic providers have one of the highest error rates of any provider specialty. And there's a variety of reasons for that we won't go into. Obviously, that is certainly the allegations of error relative to chiropractic care tend to be very hyper-technical. And for that reason, they're in many cases very appealable. I do those appeals on a daily basis, and it would be interesting to find out what the ultimate error rate is after appeals, but because the appeals process takes so long, I don't know that Medicare tracks that statistic, or at least if they do, they don't publish it. So because of the perceived, at least, high error rate among doctors of chiropractic through the OIG CERT audit program, and based upon integrity contractor review, which includes the Medicare administrative contractors, their benefit integrity units, program safeguard contractors, ZPICs, which have been recently replaced by what are called UPICs. Those error statistics are indicative that there's a high error rate among chiropractic claims. So for that reason, chiropractors are automatically targets for the TPE audit program. And specifically, if you are a provider that does a high volume of Medicare services, so certainly in the Medicare intensive states, certainly Florida pops to mind, I would expect a higher density of these audits being conducted anywhere where there's a high density of Medicare age folks. Now, the way it works is if you're selected, as I mentioned, you'll be asked to produce 20 to 40 charts. If you're asked to produce those records, make sure that you include all the records that are associated with the data service they're asking about. So the most common mistake is a provider only sends the record for the data service that they're requesting, and that's often not sufficient information because there are initial visit documentation requirements as well as subsequent visit documentation requirements. So it behooves you to send the initial visit for the course of care that the visit that they're asking about belong to, and relevant visits leading up to the visit in question, progress exams, things of that nature, or visits where there's notable improvement and so forth. Once you get your audit result, the next thing they do is they'll schedule a one-on-one education session to the extent that they found any significant error. In Medicare parlance, significant error is greater than 5%. So if there's greater than 5% error, you'll be scheduled for a one-on-one education session. They will do that education, and in fact, they can do that education if even one claim is denied following that education center, you're given a 45-day period to effect improvement, and then they go into the second round of auditing. Now, in the second round, they do the same audit, same 20 to 40 charts, and if your error rate does not improve, then they do another education session, and then there's a 45-day period, and you go into round 3. Now, at the end of round 3, if in the contractor's determination you have not evidenced significant improvement in your error rate, then a bunch of really evil things start to happen. You could be referred to CMS for the conduct of a statistical audit, and what that means is they take a sampling of claims from a broad universe of claims, and they can go back 5 years. Essentially, the reopening rule for cause, which they would have based upon a TPE multi-round audit failure, would be they can reopen claims back. Essentially, it's the year in which the claim is paid, and then plus 4 more years. So essentially, it's 5 years they can look back. They pull a sample of claims from that multi-year period, and as I mentioned, it would probably be 5 years. And then based upon the sample, they'll come up with an actual overpayment, which would probably be in the thousands of dollars. Say, if they denied everything, it'd probably be worth maybe $2,000 to $3,000 worth of claims. But then they project using ostensibly statistically valid projection methodologies. They project that error to the entire universe, to what's called the lower bound of a 90% confidence interval. And assuming that their sampling process was accurate, which is challengeable, and they use the right formulas for doing their projection, they're going to come up with a really big jaw-dropping number and demand that back. And then, of course, that also triggers an appeal process as well. So if you get into the statistical phase, that means you have 3 rounds of TPE audit cycles that you're appealing, and that appeals process for each one takes about 5 years. So the biggest danger of failing the TPE audit program is that not the value of the 3 cycles, but the ultimate statistical projection. If they elect to go that route, you can have a significant amount of money at issue, which is either earning interest for the government at, I think the current rate's 10.5%, or you're paying that money back to avoid the imposition of interest, and you're out that money for probably a 5-year period until your appeal is concluded. And that assumes that you actually win, which you may or may not do depending on the significance of the errors. Another thing that Medicare can do is they can refer you to the local contractor and put you on prepayment review, which means every time you submit a claim, you'll get what's called an ADR, an additional documentation request, in which case then you have to submit documentation associated with that claim. It gets audited, and Medicare makes a decision as to whether the service meets Medicare's coverage rules or not. And significantly, a big part of that determination is how strictly you comply with Medicare's documentation requirements. And more importantly, the contractor's perception of what those documentation requirements are. And different contractors have different perceptions. So it's sometimes a seemingly moving target, and they can keep you in prepayment review for forever. Usually the practical result of prepayment review without significant assistance and modification to your documentation practices is that you're probably not going to get paid for a Medicare claim for quite some time. And then each of those claims that gets denied has to go through an appeal process. You can, in fact, aggregate claims to make that a little more efficient. But there's a redetermination, a reconsideration, and if you can aggregate up to $160 or more of claims, then you can request an administrative law judge hearing. But again, getting that hearing takes presently about 4 years. The last thing that Medicare can do, and the most onerous thing that they can do, and I think we talked about this in one of our prior sessions, is revocation. Revocation of your Medicare billing privileges is somewhat significant because It can have impact to your credentialing ability for commercial payers. It's something that can show up on the National Practitioner Data Bank. And while it doesn't effectively preclude you from treating Medicare patients, it does preclude you from performing covered services on Medicare patients. And if we had more time, I could explain what that means, but it is a fairly significant result. So if you're selected for this TPE audit program, first and foremost, get help. Try to put your best foot forward in the first round of the review. Certainly get help with the corrective action, because the education program isn't going to tell you exactly what you need to do to your documentation. They can tell you what they think is wrong, but they're not going to tell you what you need to document or how you need to document to fix it. So certainly get help from somebody that's qualified to do that, and hopefully you can escape the TPE audit cycle before the third phase. If you end up and you have 3 rounds of failure, things are probably going to get very unpleasant as far as Medicare is concerned, and they could get very expensive to the extent that they elect to put you through a statistical sampling. The other point I'd like to make about this TPE audit program is these audit results also have implications under the voluntary disclosure rule, which, to the extent that the audit result puts you on notice that you have similar error in other claims, that look back is 6 years. You have to voluntarily disclose and refund those. If you fail to do so and Medicare finds out about it and takes issue with it, though all of those claims become false claims, and therefore you have False Claims Act or fraud liability for simply failing to do that investigation, disclosure, and refund of similar quote-unquote overpayments. So that's all we have time for today. Next week, be sure to tune in. Dr. Sam Collins is going to be here to discuss, I'm sure, a fascinating topic related to coding and billing. That's all we have time for today. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.